You prayed for them, not just once, not in a casual, passing way. You prayed for them the way you pray when something matters more than almost anything else in your life. On your knees, in the dark, with the kind of desperation that only comes when you are watching something you love beginning to slip away and you cannot find a way to hold on to it. You asked God to fix it, to fix them, to give you the strength to make it work, to show you what you were doing wrong so you could do better, to save the relationship that felt like the most important thing in your life. And then it ended anyway. And in the silence that followed, in the grief that came in waves you were not prepared for, you asked a different question, not "please fix this," but why? Why did this happen? Why did this person come into my life, change everything, make me feel things I had never felt before, and then leave? Why did God allow this? Why did God not answer the prayer that felt most urgent? And then someone said something to you, a friend, a family member, something you read, something that was probably meant to comfort you but that somehow made the grief more complicated rather than less. They said, maybe God removed them from your life for a reason, and you did not know what to do with that. Because part of you wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that the ending had a purpose, that the pain was not random, that somewhere in the design of what happened there was a meaning that you could not yet see but that would one day make the suffering make sense. And another part of you, the part that was still raw, still grieving, still waking up at 3 a.m. with the specific ache of their absence, could not reconcile the idea of a purposeful God with the experience of this specific pain. If God removed them for a reason, why did it have to hurt this much? If this was protection, why does it feel like loss? If they were wrong for you, why did loving them feel so right? Today we are going to sit with those questions. Not to give you easy answers that dismiss the complexity of what you are feeling. Not to hand you a spiritual framework that makes the pain sound smaller than it was, but to give you something honest, something that holds both the psychological truth and the spiritual truth of what painful endings actually are, and what they actually do to us, and what they might actually mean. Because I believe both are real, the psychology and the spiritual truth. And I believe they are not in contradiction with each other. I believe they are telling the same story from different angles. And by the end of this video, I think you will believe that too. Before we go further, I want to plant 4 questions in your mind. Questions that live in the intersection of heartbreak and faith and the desperate human need to find meaning in pain. Why does God allow us to love people who end up hurting us? How do you know the difference between a person God is removing from your life and a person you are supposed to fight for? Why does the removal of someone wrong for you often hurt more than losing someone who was right for you? And the question underneath all of the others, was this person sent to destroy me or to grow me, and how do I know which one? Hold every one of those questions. They will all be answered before this video ends. And the journey to those answers is going to take us through both the science of what loss does to the human mind and soul, and the deeper wisdom that has been understood by spiritual traditions for thousands of years, about why painful endings exist and what they make possible. Now, I want to start with something that the psychology and the spiritual tradition agree on completely. Even when they use completely different language, both of them say this: not everything that feels like the right thing is the right thing. The psychology says this through what we know about attachment, about trauma bonding, about the way the brain learns to associate a specific person with safety and love and home, even when that person is actually the source of threat. We have talked in previous videos about how the nervous system can become so conditioned to a specific dynamic that it registers the wrong person as the right person, that it mistakes the familiar for the true, that it experiences the withdrawal of something harmful as loss rather than as liberation. The spiritual tradition says the same thing differently. It says that the heart is capable of loving what is not good for it, that desire and divine purpose are not always aligned, that what we want most fiercely in a given moment is not always what we were created for, that there is a wisdom operating in our lives that is larger than our immediate feelings, and that sometimes expresses itself through endings that our immediate feelings cannot understand. Both the psychology and the spirit are saying, your pain is real, your love was real, and the person was still wrong for you. All 3 of those things can be simultaneously true. And the journey of processing a painful ending, whether you approach it through therapy or through prayer or through both, is the journey of learning to hold all three at once. Now let us talk about what actually happens inside a person when someone significant is removed from their life. Because understanding the psychology of loss is not separate from understanding its spiritual dimension. It is the terrain through which the spiritual work has to happen. When a significant relationship ends, the brain undergoes something that neuroscientists have compared in its neurological signature to withdrawal from a substance. The person we loved had become associated, through months or years of shared experience, through the neurochemical floods of attachment, through the rewiring of the brain's reward system, with our most fundamental psychological needs: safety, belonging, being known, being chosen, being worth loving. When they are removed, those needs do not disappear. They remain, loudly, urgently, painfully present. And the brain, which learned that one specific person was the source of meeting those needs, does not immediately update to look elsewhere for their fulfillment. It looks for them. It looks for the specific person who has been associated with their fulfillment. And when it cannot find them, it produces the experience we call grief. Not just sadness, something more physical than sadness. An ache that lives in the body, a restlessness that makes sleep difficult, and concentration impossible. A compulsive returning to memories. A reaching for the phone that stops halfway when you remember there is no one to call. A hole in the fabric of your daily life that is shaped exactly like the person who is no longer there. This is not weakness. This is the brain doing what it was designed to do when something it learned to depend on is suddenly absent. And here is where the psychology and the spiritual truth begin to speak to each other in ways that I find extraordinary. Because the spiritual traditions that talk about God removing people from our lives do not say that the removal is painless. They do not say you should not grieve. They do not say the loss is not real. They do not say the love was wrong or the attachment was sinful or the grief is evidence of insufficient faith. They say the pain is part of the process, not a sign that the process has gone wrong, a sign that it is working. And when you put that alongside what the neuroscience tells us, that grief is the brain's necessary process of updating its model of the world, of releasing the dependency on a specific source of attachment, of slowly, painfully, necessarily learning to look elsewhere for what it needs, the two traditions are describing the same thing. Grief is not evidence that God made a mistake in removing them. Grief is the cost of the update, and the update is necessary for everything that comes after. Now I want to talk about something that is not often discussed when people talk about God removing someone from your life, something that is uncomfortable but that I think is essential to understand if the concept is going to be genuinely helpful rather than just temporarily soothing. Not every painful ending is a divine removal. Some endings are just endings. Some relationships run their natural course. Some people are genuinely good for each other for a period of time and then genuinely grow apart. Some losses are not protection. They are just loss. And rushing to frame every painful ending as God's purposeful intervention can actually prevent the genuine processing of grief by replacing it with a narrative that feels better but does not do the deep work. The question of whether a painful ending was a divine removal or simply an ending is not always answerable in the immediate aftermath. In the rawness of fresh grief, the mind is not in a position to assess clearly. Everything feels significant. Every loss feels like it must mean something because the alternative, that it meant nothing, is almost unbearable. Genuine spiritual discernment about the meaning of an ending usually happens later, after the grief has had time to move through you rather than being prematurely resolved by a framework that makes it feel explained before it has been fully felt. The spiritual truth about painful endings is not that every one of them was orchestrated by God for your benefit. It is that every one of them can be navigated in a way that produces growth. That the same loss that could leave you more closed, more defended, more unable to trust can also, if approached with honesty and patience and the willingness to feel what it asks you to feel, leave you more open, more discerning, more capable of the genuine connection you were always meant for. The question is not only was this God's removal, the question is also, how am I going to carry this? Now let us talk about what the spiritual traditions actually say about why painful people enter our lives in the first place, because I think this is where the deepest and most useful wisdom lives. Almost every major spiritual tradition holds some version of the idea that the people who challenge us most are also the people who teach us most. Not because suffering is good, not because God wants us to be hurt, but because certain lessons about ourselves, certain truths about who we are and what we are capable of and what we were built for, are only accessible through specific kinds of experience. And sometimes those experiences involve people who were not meant to stay, who were meant to arrive, to shake something loose in us that had been stuck, to reveal something about our patterns, our wounds, our capacity for love, our tendency to minimize our own worth in service of someone else's comfort, to bring to the surface something that needed to be seen and addressed before the life we were actually built for could begin. Many survivors of painful relationships, especially relationships that involved narcissistic abuse or manipulation, describe a pattern when they look back from a place of greater healing. They describe how the relationship, as painful as it was, forced them to confront things about themselves they had been avoiding for years. The wound that made them susceptible to the love bombing, the pattern of people-pleasing that made it hard to leave, the childhood blueprint for love that included anxiety and uncertainty as familiar components, the deeply held belief that they had to earn the right to be loved, rather than simply existing as deserving of it. These things were present before the relationship began, but the relationship made them impossible to ignore. And the ending, the painful, devastating, world-rearranging ending, was often what finally made the confrontation with those things unavoidable. In that sense, the painful person was a catalyst, not a gift in the ordinary sense of the word, not something to be grateful for in the simple, uncomplicated way that we are grateful for good things, but a catalyst in the alchemical sense, something that, through its presence and its impact, changed the composition of what it came into contact with, made possible a transformation that would not have happened without that specific intervention. You were changed by what happened to you, not broken by it, changed. And the direction of that change, whether it moves you toward closure and growth, and the genuine love you were always capable of, or toward defensiveness and closure, and the slow narrowing of what you allow yourself to feel, that direction is one of the most important choices of your life. And it is a choice, not in the moment of raw grief, not in the first weeks and months when the pain is too immediate for choice to feel possible, but eventually, when the grief has softened enough that you can begin to look at it with something approaching clarity, the choice of what you are going to let this make you. Now I want to talk about something that many people who are in the middle of a painful ending experience but rarely have named for them. The strange guilt of healing. As the grief begins to lift, as the days start to feel slightly more bearable, as the constant presence of the loss begins to recede from the foreground of your mind, many people experience a feeling that is almost like betrayal. As if healing is somehow a betrayal of the love they felt. As if the fact that they are beginning to feel better means that the relationship did not matter as much as they thought it did. As if they are supposed to grieve forever, to prove that what they had was real. This guilt is a sign of the depth of your love, but it is based on a misunderstanding of what healing actually is. Healing is not the erasure of what was. It is not the decision that it did not matter. It is not the closing off of the part of you that loved so completely and was so completely changed by the loving. Healing is the integration of the experience into who you are becoming. It is the process of carrying what happened in a way that does not prevent you from continuing. And continuing, moving forward, allowing yourself to experience joy again, allowing the possibility of love again, allowing the life that was disrupted by what happened to begin to reconstitute itself around what you are now rather than what you lost. Continuing is not a betrayal of what was real. It is the fulfillment of it. Because the love you had, the genuine, real, deep love that you brought to that relationship, even if it was not received the way it deserved to be, that love was not wasted. It lived in you, it shaped you, it revealed to you the depth of what you are capable of giving. And that depth does not disappear when the relationship ends. It waits for somewhere worthy of it. Now I want to address something directly that lives in the heart of the question about God removing people from our lives. The anger. Because many people who intellectually accept the idea that God might remove someone for a reason are simultaneously deeply, quietly, sometimes shamefully angry at God for the way it was done, for allowing the love bombing that made the attachment so profound. for allowing the years of investment before the truth became clear, for allowing the specific cruelty of loving someone so completely and discovering that the love was not what it seemed, for the timing, for the loss, for the grief that nobody fully warned them about and that lasts longer than anyone around them seems to think it should. This anger is not a sign of insufficient faith. It is a sign of a real relationship with something larger than yourself. You do not get genuinely angry at things that do not matter to you. You do not rail against the silence of a God you do not believe in. The anger is itself a form of prayer, a reaching towards something you expect to be there even when the evidence in your immediate experience feels like contradiction. Bring the anger. Bring it honestly, fully, without the performance of peace you do not yet feel. Because the spiritual journey through painful endings is not the journey from grief to acceptance through willpower and positive reframing. It is the journey from honest pain to honest peace, through everything in between, and everything in between is allowed. Every emotion that the ending produced in you, the grief, the confusion, the anger, the shame, the moments of relief that made you feel guilty, the days when you missed them so much it was physical, the days when you were so grateful they were gone it surprised you. All of it is part of the honest process. And God, if you believe in God, is present in all of it. Not just in the peace at the end, in the mess in the middle. Now I promised you 4 answers. Here they are. The first question was, why does God allow us to love people who end up hurting us? Because love is not guaranteed to be safe by the fact that it is genuine. Love is a capacity, an extraordinary human capacity for connection and vulnerability and commitment. And like all capacities, it can be expressed toward people who are worthy of it and toward people who are not. God does not remove our capacity for love to protect us from loving wrongly, because the same capacity that makes us vulnerable to loving the wrong person is the capacity that makes us capable of the deepest, most genuine, most transformative love that exists. To protect us from the first, you would have to remove the second, and what would be left would not be safety. It would be a diminishment of something essential to what we are. The permission to love, genuinely, fully, at risk, is one of the most profound gifts of being human. And it comes with the vulnerability of loving sometimes without the return that love deserves. The second question was, how do you know the difference between a person God is removing from your life and a person you are supposed to fight for? This is one of the most difficult questions in the human experience, and there is no answer that is always correct. But there are signals. A person worth fighting for is one whose fundamental character, not their behavior in moments of stress, but their character at the core, is oriented toward your genuine well-being, even when they are imperfect in expressing it. A person being removed is one whose fundamental dynamic with you produces a consistent pattern of diminishment of your worth, your perception, your sense of yourself, your ability to trust what you know to be true. Fighting for someone whose core character is genuinely good and who is genuinely trying, even imperfectly, is different from fighting to maintain a bond with someone whose pattern, however painful it is to name, is consistently toward your harm. The distinction is not always visible in the moment, but in stillness, in honest reflection, in the parts of yourself that know before you are ready to say it, the distinction is usually already there. The third question was, why does the removal of someone wrong for you often hurt more than losing someone who is right for you? Because the depth of the pain is not proportional to the health of the relationship. It is proportional to the depth of the neurological and psychological dependency that was created. A relationship that involved love bombing, intermittent reinforcement, and trauma bonding creates a dependency that is more powerful than ordinary attachment. Not because the love was greater, but because the mechanism that created the bond was more intense. Losing a genuinely healthy relationship hurts. But losing a relationship that involved the specific neurochemical flooding of love bombing and the specific rewiring of trauma bonding hurts at a neurological level that ordinary loss does not reach. The intensity of your pain after losing someone who was wrong for you is not evidence that they were right for you. It is evidence of how thoroughly the dependency was created. And understanding that distinction is one of the most important steps in not mistaking the intensity of the pain for the rightness of the person. The fourth question, was this person sent to destroy me or to grow me? And how do I know which one? Both can be true, and neither has to be mutually exclusive. The same person who caused genuine damage can also catalyze genuine growth. Not because the damage was good, not because the pain was deserved, but because the human spirit is extraordinarily resilient and extraordinarily creative in what it does with difficult material. What was done to you was not sent by God as a gift, but who you are becoming in response to what was done to you, the depth, the discernment, the compassion for yourself and others that is growing in the places where the damage was done, that is not despite what happened. It is through it. And the question of whether you were sent this person to be destroyed or to grow is ultimately answered not by what happened, but by what you choose to do with it. The person who was sent to destroy you has already failed, because you are here. Still asking the question, still reaching for understanding, still refusing to let the ending be the end of your story. That refusal is not small. That refusal is everything, and it is the beginning of the answer. Let me leave you with this. You prayed for them, and the prayer was not answered the way you asked. But I want to suggest something to you. What if the prayer was answered? Not the specific request, not fix this, not save this, not keep this person in my life, but the prayer underneath that request. The real prayer that the specific words were reaching toward. The prayer for a life that is genuine, for love that is real, for a connection that does not require you to diminish yourself to maintain it, for peace that is not the absence of conflict but the presence of something solid and true, for the version of yourself that knows what you are worth and will not accept less. What if the ending was the answer to that prayer, not the answer you asked for, the answer you needed? And what if everything that is happening now, the grief, the growth, the slow and painful and necessary process of becoming someone who knows things they could not have known any other way, what if all of it is the answer arriving? Not quickly, not cleanly, not in the way we ask for things when we want them to be easy, but arriving, as answers always do, in the fullness of time that we cannot see from where we are standing, but that exists nonetheless. Give the answer time to complete itself. Subscribe to this channel because every week we go deeper into the psychology and the human truth of healing, loss, love, and what it means to become who you were always meant to be through everything that tried to prevent it. And remember this, what was removed was not your future. It was what was standing between you and it. Keep going.